Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Conscious Grief series. I am very excited to be sitting with Mandy Gosling today. Mandy is a psychotherapist, and we're going to really talk more specifically about adults who were bereaved as children, which is obviously very close to my heart, being one of those people specifically. So welcome, Mandy. It's really lovely to have you here.
Thanks, Tara. I'm really pleased to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's really wonderful to have met you recently, and I know that you also come to your work from a personal experience. So perhaps first of all, you could explain about what led you to becoming a psychotherapist and doing the amazing work that you do now.
It was a very long road, and that started in 1973. And my mum died of breast cancer when I was 9 years old. And of course, back then, it was really not taken care of as it's taken care of now with, lots of support for children. So I'm an only child and kind of just got on with it, I guess you would say, and kind of went through life with some challenges. And so I'd always been interested in people and kind of what lies beneath them. I read my first psychology book when I was 20. Was very dark. And then sort of in my 30s, going through relationship struggles, wanted to understand more about myself. And then when I got to my 40s, I thought, well, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? And so I thought, well, I'll do a year's course, your foundation course in psychotherapy. So that's what I did. And then I thought, oh, no, I like this. So then I signed up for another 4 years. And then I did a 2 years master's. Then I did another year's training as a relationship therapist. And out I churned, really. I'm also a mum to two grown-up children now, and I'm a grandmother. So I've got lots of different hats, really. And so from really my master's, I researched, the long-term impact of childhood parental bereavement. I didn't necessarily set out to do this. I wanted to be a psychotherapist, but then the road led me to be more specific. And so I began my research. I didn't want to do it. I can remember feeling, I definitely don't want to look into that box. But I guess that's what you do. Things present themselves and you go, okay, I trust the people around me and I'll do it. And then, as I began my own research for 2 years, I realized just how much was missing for this particular sector, for adults bereaved as children. Even in terms of research or publications. And I finished it in 2016, I think. So, we're a bit further on and there's more since I finished my research. But it was just apparent, and I still now keep trying to have conversations to try and highlight the impact of the longevity of grief from being a child, as an adult. So there's lots of services for children today, which is fantastic. And then there are adult services, but we kind of straddle this space in the middle, which, well, where do we fit? Well, we do fit in the childhood stuff because there's a lot of theories that underpin it, and we do fit in the adult sector, but we don't quite fit in either. So that's kind of where I thought, right, I will focus a lot of my work. It's not all of my work, but a lot of probably about 70% of my work is with adults bereaved as children. So I guess I've become a bit of a warrior about it, where I try and, keep going to make people aware and, as you would say, conscious of this particular area of grief. And so I formed ABC Grief, which is a resource website where there's, books and podcasts, the beginnings of blogs, just so that for people who had experienced it, family members who maybe wanted to understand it, and also for professionals, therapists, so that if they have somebody with this presentation, they can understand it a bit more. So I've been working 13 years in this area, and I feel like I'm in a constant research project where I'm learning from my clients and then they help somebody else. And so it's just this kind of lovely to and fro that, I gather the knowledge and, but that helps me understand what it looks like. So yeah, it's finding ways in which to make it more known. I'm just doing some research with somebody in Europe where we're really trying to look at the lived experiences of adults bereaved as children, and the nuances and the complexities and where does it fit, things like prolonged grief disorder, delayed grief, PTSD symptoms. So more in that sort of clinical aspect, which is, I step into, but, mine is a slightly different space, is how does it present in real life terms when somebody comes to therapy?
Amazing. Amazing. So when people who are adults bereaved as children come into your practice, into your therapy room, what are the struggles that you commonly see?
For adults bereaved as children, they tend, a few might come with they are aware of their grief is impacting them, but more often than not, they don't. So they don't turn up and say, oh, my mum or dad died when I was XYZ. They go, I'm having, relationship issues, or I'm really anxious, or I'm having health anxiety, or something just doesn't feel right, or I'm depressed. And the phrase of term I use is the wheels start falling off, where you can go so long and then it all starts getting a bit more difficult, or the psyche kind of awakens you to okay, it's time now to do some work. It's time to kind of reflect on, and as a bereaved child, you have a very strong survival instinct. So you just keep going. And I guess until the wheels fall off, because the majority of people I see may be 20, 30, 40 years from when they experience their grief. So they wouldn't necessarily think it is the core point of why they find life really difficult. I'm thinking about, someone who said to me, I didn't realize it was to do with my grief. And you don't, because it's the kind of grief that is really hidden beneath the surface, layer upon layer upon layer. If you're going 20, 30, 40 years, it's a hidden grief. It's kind of, I like to think of us as sort of the lost mourners. We just had to survive it. And then, we're propelled into adult life and we've got to get on with it. And we've been lost somewhere and we're in this no man's land, which society still doesn't really, I guess, talk about. I was at the European Grief Conference in September, and so I was in a room full of people. I think there were over 300 people there, and I was doing a poster presentation, and I went with my badge, adults bereaved as children, kind of going and, asking people, so what do you do and how do you research and, what services? And, I was met with, oh, we don't, but we should. I mean, even still now, I mean, I love the fact that we have so much now for children, unlike what I received. But what about us who didn't have it and don't kind of fit in the adult world or have maybe, I guess my passion is also to help therapists understand from my own experiences what it looks like and some of the things and the underpinnings and how you bring the types of theories I work with together as a whole, because it doesn't just fit in grief. It fits in other theories as well. And then how do we find, that wholeness of self?
Well, I relate so much to the phrases that you were saying, because it took me like many, many years to realize that I was grieving. And because like even like a few years after my mum died, I'd be like, well, it's not, my issues aren't that, because my mum died like 2 years ago. My issues are the job or the relationship, the job or the relationship or something else. And that idea that that if we are bereaved children, we're quite resilient, we're quite used to keep going, and it's until, like you mentioned, the wheels falling off in certain aspects of our life, then we get into the therapy room, but we're not relating it back 20, 30 years previous. Yeah. So amazing.
Yeah. I mean, even in my own journey, I didn't do what I call my grief work, or really facing it. And it's not easy. It's not easy. Is it worth it? Yeah. But I was in my late 40s. I even did 4 years of therapy in my training and never talked once about my mum. I mean, it's astonishing. It's like, oh no, let's not do that. It's nothing. It's just nicely tucked away in a box. I've forgotten about it. But that's what impacts. That was what impacts us. I did everything else, and then when I was doing my master's research was when it's kind of like it hit me in the face, where it was like, oh no, oh no, this is it. It's time.
It's really extraordinary. I mean, I've thought about that for myself. Why was it all these other layers that I was obsessing about? And I guess it's because our ego or something, it's such a painful place to go to. So we're intellectually trying to, use other issues as our issue because we don't want to go to that most painful place, which was the 9-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we were both 9 years old. How can a 9-year-old process it? How does the development of the self from that point of rupture? We are, whatever age you are, us 9-year-olds suspended in an adult body, trying to function in an adult body. And you're absolutely right. The ego doesn't develop, and we have to have a strong enough ego in order to then look at the other parts that may be playing out in the present moment. There has to be enough strength in that. That's Jungian theory. The first stage is development of the ego. So that you can then go into the shadow, like we were just talking before. You've to be able to face it, there has to be an ability to tolerate that, because otherwise you just implode. So so a lot of it is, so for me, I work a lot with firstly sort of mostly sort of traumatic symptoms that may be held in the body, where people are very highly anxious or depressed. And then, it sort of then draws on, how do we develop more of self whilst we're an adult? We've got to go and pick those small children up and bring them up into the present and, re-nurture them and love them from our inner landscape. And also, then grief folds into all of that. And it's not linear because everybody's story is completely different. And there's pre-death, post-death, other factors of how we are formed that kind of have this outcome where we suddenly go, why are my wheels falling off?
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess a lot of the wheel falling off episodes come from relationships. That's certainly what finally, made me get into a therapist room, because of relationships. And those are our sort of, lexicons of healing. So, what would you say about ABCs, adults bereaved of children, and relationships in your experience?
That's why I trained as I did in the further year training as relationship therapist. I'd also struggled in relationships. I feel at nearly 60, I'm doing pretty good now. Took a long time. But yeah, it's one of the main reasons. And I wanted to understand the complexity. I was going to read you a client, but maybe should we just skip to the relationship part rather than the client part about what an ABC looks like, or what?
Oh, no, definitely. Yeah. Go for it.
Which bit do you want me to do, Tara? You decide. What would your lovely listeners like to hear?
I would definitely like to hear about an ABC sort of profile.
Yeah. An ABC profile. Okay. So then that will show you, say, some of the nuances, and then we'll talk about relationships, because I think relationships are really important. I mean, in therapy in general, people come with relationship struggles, either with their family or in their romantic relationships or their friendships. So it's a big topic, and for ABCs, it's a very big topic, for obviously theoretical reasons why. But I'll give you a profile of what an ABC potentially may look like, and some of your listeners may see some of it. It literally is a brief snapshot. It's not like this is definitely what it's like, but there are aspects that I've tried to put together from actual experiences of what I've gathered over the years, from my own, from other people, from experiences. So this is Marie. Okay. Marie is a fictional client. So this is her profile. So Marie's dad died when she was 14. She was an only child. Her mum had to sell the house and go back to work. There was little time for them to have conversations about dad. Her mum was shut down in her own grief, and Marie didn't know what to do. She went to school trying to feel normal and fit in. She found it difficult to talk to her mum or her friends, and there were no support services. She felt isolated, alone, and didn't understand her feelings. She withdrew. It felt safest to do that, and focused on making sure mum was okay. She struggled to concentrate at school, and over the next few years, her grades slipped. They were okay before dad died, and now she just felt stupid. Marie didn't want to bother mum with anything that might upset her, so kept her thoughts and feelings quiet. Her exam grades weren't as she hoped and meant she couldn't go into the career she wanted to. She started to feel worse, and the only way to get some relief was to drink alcohol. When she drank, she found a way to be carefree, but it was often to excess, and she became ashamed of herself. Marie did find a job she liked and worked really hard. She had learned in life how to keep going. However, this was sometimes often at the expense of her well-being, or noticing what she needed, and she needed to please her boss with every request. This made her feel part of the team, and she was recognized even though she was exhausted. Marie was also recognized in other ways at work, her outbursts of anger and for being a party girl, and this often didn't go down well. She spent a great deal of time excessively worrying, especially about her health. There was a phase of high anxiety about a minor condition where she feared she would be disabled, always fearing the worst was about to happen. Her anxiety heightened with thoughts of dying most days, and she still worried about what would happen to Mum. Marie's head was full of the same record playing over and over, sometimes different tunes, but on constant repeat. It was never ending. Even with all her fears, anxieties, and anger, she kept going. She had a few short relationships and many sexual encounters, which she often felt ashamed of. And although it made everything feel just a bit better, inside there was still an unease and sadness. Of course, she had moments of fun, experienced these mostly on the surface, though, and not quite how she'd imagined deep in her heart. She wondered about settling down with someone. Maybe it would make things a bit better. She was 32 now, and perhaps it was time. Thoughts led to who would have her and put up with some of her challenges and difficulties, and she feared they might leave. She did eventually find someone, and it was an okay relationship. At times, though, it made her feel more afraid, and she questioned the relationship and all the arguments they had. So she coped by keeping her emotional distance with her partner. It felt better like that. Marie decided she didn't want to have children, a conscious choice to not burden any of her own kids with the experience she had experienced. And so, with her anxieties, low mood, fears, drinking, anger, and relationship issues, she comes to therapy at age 44 with 30 years of struggles.
I have chills. Yeah.
That's what it looks like, Tara. None of that looks like grief, not in the slightest. But that's what unresolved childhood grief looks like in adults. That's it. And, there's many more to that. But all of those in there are actual experiences I have seen. That's what it is.
Yeah, I relate to many of those attributes of Marie's. And it took me a long time to realize that it was grief and bereavement, because even though I had been to see therapists and coaches, they didn't really ever sit me down and explain what a bereavement was to a child, how grief looks, because we often just think of grief as just crying.
Oh, yeah, I kind of think it's just not a box of tissues and a few tears. It's really complex. Unresolved childhood grief is complex. In the nuances of which it presents itself. And of course, everybody's is different. And that's why you do need therapists who understand. It was really interesting. I guess I also look at transgenerational grief. So often I have clients who are what I call second generation bereaved. So they are experiencing the experiences of their parents being bereaved as children. And again, that's another area not understood. And the first time I became aware of it was when I was working with somebody, and I don't know, it just came into the room, and suddenly I was awoken to the fact that there was a lot of bereavement and grief in the family with early life losses that I hadn't been conscious of. So now I'm, it's like making it, as you say, grief really conscious. Mm-hmm. And even like second generation, not just even first generation, where is it held in the kind of family genogram? Mm-hmm. Because it carries forward. And I think, even in that small instance, it was like, oh, we don't really pay attention to how an individual might then pass that on. And the struggles that then the second generation, I call them ABC seconds, the second generation experiences. And And it's a question I ask now in my assessments. Obviously I ask, my assessments I do, family history. And so I would know fairly instantly whether somebody was bereaved. And even if they don't come with that presentation, I know it's there. But I now ask, and I urge all therapists to ask, were any of your parents bereaved as children? Because that can manifest often as overparenting, like really trying to keep somebody very close, which again impacts the ego development. Or it can manifest in what I call missing pieces, where again would be more common probably, where people don't know how to parent. But also, let's just say somebody was bereaved at 16, 17. Then the adult to adult relationship, because they haven't experienced that adult to adult relationship. So the adult to adult relationship is missing. So you get all these little nuances that you see. And that's why I'm passionate about adults bereaved as children, understanding, getting the resources, getting the research, more people talking about it so that we know what to look out for and how that may impact us, may impact our children, impacts our friendships, impacts society. So it's a much bigger topic than just one person.
It is. And what about, I was just thinking, like, because my mum died when I was 21. So what's the sort of cutoff point as a child who's been bereaved, like the age?
We generally look at, and this is reflected in most of the children's services, is 25, because that's the age in which we consider the psyche to the mind to be developed by then. So we don't get the full prefrontal cortex development until age 25, which is our thinking capacity. So yeah, up to 25.
Interesting.
We can't just, I think, often people think, oh, it's 18. No, there's still a whole way to go before, that time. And, I think it's sort of reframing that, and again, if it's later, what else has happened before? Have there been other, significant early life losses? So if somebody was significant in the family, like it may be a grandparent live with you, that is also part of kind of the primary caregiver remit. That would be significant. The loss would be felt of the child. It'd be different if a grandparent was just like in that normal space, but if it was a closer relationship, within the developing self.
Yeah. And it's quite interesting that as well, isn't it? How we're sort of going back a little bit more now, where grandparents are looking after their grandchildren more because of the cost of living, having to work. So those children will be more deeply impacted by their grandparents dying.
Yeah. And as long as it's, research shows us that if the death is appropriately handled, so that it can integrate, so that it doesn't go, what's happened? It's, it's done in a gradual process. The outcomes are so much better. But of course, many of us never had anything. Like, I've seen people be told at school and go back to their lessons in the afternoon, or go back to school the following day, or nobody ever talks about it ever again. That's not exactly, and there's a whole bunch of us like that. Even in today, that still happens. It's much less, but it still happens.
Yeah, it does. So, that was interesting, by the way. Thank you for sharing that story of Marie. I'm sure many people like myself are going to listen to that and relate deeply. And so then again, because I relate to Marie, because I've had many relationships, that I haven't had any children because I don't want to burden them with all my issues.
Well, the flip side of that, Tara, is we just want to have children to kind of do the healing bit. I mean, I was in that camp. It was like, starting to sniff baby powder in mother care at a very young age because it was like, I need to complete that cycle. And it was interesting when I got activated when my granddaughter was born, but it was like the most amazing thing, because it's like, oh, now there's 3 of us again, we can continue. But people, there's these polarities. Okay. So it's like, where's the middle ground? It's always, where's the middle ground? Just like, oh, I'm going to I want a child now. I want to kind of, create that bond, even though it's the other way around. Or it's like, no, I'm definitely not doing it. Those are the polarities.
Yeah. Yeah. Strong polarities. So, going back to the relationship piece.
Yeah.
What would you say are us ABCs, what challenges are we prone to?
They're complex, and I'm going to try my best to try and educate, do some kind of teaching around this. So I'm going to look at my notes. I'm going to read a little excerpt from a book, which, just to set the scene of the relationship challenges and to paint the picture. So this is from a book called Love and Awakening by John Welwood. So discovering the sacred path of intimate relationships. And the little paragraph is entitled Stuck in a Cage, which I think is scene setting. So he writes, love's expansiveness inevitably brings us up against the walls of our personality structure, the prison of our old identities. Just as a prisoner who wants to escape from jail must carefully study its layout, we need to understand more precisely what these soul cages are made of, if we want to free ourselves from them. This kind of self-inquiry is essential in making a relationship more conscious. Mm-hmm. So we have to find the keys to our cages. And of course, cages are different shapes and sizes and dimensions. So I think that fits with your themes of being conscious around grief. And this is about being conscious around grief for ABCs, but also being conscious around relationship struggles, which may or may not be attributed to grief. Some of it will be, but some of it might not be. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a duality. But yes, we do struggle in relationships.
Yeah.
and for very good reason. So I'm just looking at my notes here. So I'm trying to remember everything to be able to tell your lovely people. So thinking about the cage, and of course everybody's is different. What we have to be mindful of, it's not just our material, it is also our partner's material. And then what becomes co-created. So this space between you, that is the place of wounding, but is also the place of healing. Mm-hmm. This kind of invisible space that, we come and put our bit in and they come and put our bit in, and then there's that tension and we're maybe butting up against each other, but also there may be pieces in that space between that also invite healing. I would say, as a therapist, a lot of our healing comes through the lens of relationship, because it's a mirror. It's a mirror to what's happening. It's a mirror that activates. It's the opportunity to see something else. Often our partners carry something that we need to internalize that we haven't internalized. but they will certainly activate our material. It's, people get a little, everybody puts their best foot forward when they get into a relationship. Oh, I'm really nice and all that. And then it's like, no, you're just really a human being. And then it starts. And that's when the invitation for growth kind of comes in. So every dysfunction has a function. And it provides an opportunity to reflect and be more conscious of a need that was not met in early life. So in couple work, we do use a lot of early life material. So we're looking at attachment theories, and some of your people may be familiar with attachment, and I'm not going to go into attachment theory, in great detail. But basically, what we're looking at is what our attachment style is. So if someone's a secure attachment, they tend to function better in relationship because they can be in relationship and they can be autonomous. So they're able to put a foot in each one, oh, I'm okay here and I'm okay there, sort of that balanced position. If we've had something happen to us, or, our attachment needs were not met in some way, then we develop other styles of attachment, and these play out in our adult life. So I'm an anxious attachment. I'm just putting my hand up there. Do you know what you are?
I'm like the avoidant one. Yeah, I'm always running away.
I'm the one clinging to somebody as they're about to leave the house. Okay, so that's the other end of the spectrum. You're out the door before them.
Yeah. Always plotting my exit.
That's what it looks like. It's like, oh, I want to get away. It's like, oh no, don't leave me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's wired into us. We have an attachment style, and of course, we need attachments to survive. But of course, attachments with our primary caregivers, and if we're talking about early life parental bereavement, then that's been ruptured. So it tends to cause, not a secure attachment, because we're like, oh my God, I'm free floating. There's nobody here for me. What do I do? And so it then presents as often avoidant. Yes, you're out the door, avoid of getting close, or, the anxious attachment, which is, I can't be without anybody. What's really interesting with anxious attachments, as when I work with people, is that we then get different. People think they're then, oh no, I'm an avoidant, and it's not. It's just that they're an anxious attachment, and they'll attach, and then the fear comes in of getting close. So a defense structure then comes up, and then they go, oh, I don't think I want to be in that relationship, even though they're an anxious attachment.
Yeah, I was going to say
they go through those phases of, the attachment style, but then the defenses as well. So it can be a bit confusing of what you might be. So it might be that it's just a defense of getting close as opposed to what your primary attachment style is.
Yeah, I definitely I can relate to both. It's almost like I can feel in some stages I can be anxious attached, and then I do the avoidant. Yeah.
Yeah. And, again, you're kind of going, it's like, well, how do I find a place where I can kind of work with this relationship or be in this relationship? And, it's lots of deep breaths and trying to understand each other of what's playing out, because your partner will be in that too. I mean, when I did my relationship training, it was like, oh my goodness, how does anybody have a relationship? Like, this is really difficult, because this kind of ball of stuff, just starts whirring, because it's not just you, it's the other person as well. And again, that's understanding each other, understanding the place of which you both operate from is really helpful. Communication. I mean, in couple therapy, that's what we're trying to get is, it's not your job to fix the other person in any way, but you can be compassionate. You kind of, as I say, you don't go around poking the bear if you know somebody has a particular way of being. that you can be mindful of, and that then invites more kind of heart connection and space. So this is in our blueprint. I'm sure everybody will be really pleased to know that they have a relationship blueprint. Mm-hmm. And we reenact the patterns. And this is where it's tricky for adults bereaved as children, because we take, I mean, this is the same for anybody who's, even if they're not bereaved, you know, the positive and negative qualities from our primary caregivers, and then we put them into the relationship. So there's an exercise that I do, and sometimes I actually do it with individuals. It's called the unconscious fit, and it's a really useful exercise where we look at all the positive traits, the negative traits, and then go through the exercise of what those things mean, and then kind of just how you behave. And when I first did that, you know, and I was probably about 50. And it was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. Why did I not know this? It's like, this should be in the school curriculum. It should be handed out, you know. Okay, if this happened to you, this is what, you know, everybody was like in your family. This is how it's going to play out. And it is literally that simple to try and understand some of what's happening that is preventing, you know, those relationships. The difficulty with ABCs is what I call this love and loss intrinsically linked in the psyche. So in a normal developmental process, what will happen is that, you know, you'll have deaths occur, of course, but it will be held in the parental structure of safety. So you can tolerate it. It's like, oh, there's loss, but oh no, I'm still loved and everything's really safe. With ABCs, what happens is somebody I love dies, like the person that takes care of me. So love and loss become intrinsically linked in the psyche. So the pleasure of loving becomes tied to the pain of loss. And that's what becomes imprinted on our minds, which is why we do, I'm going to cling to you, or I'm going to push you out the door, because we have this imprint that we have to be conscious of and try and, you know, be able to work through. You know, it is a struggle, but I think if you know that that's what's there and you're conscious of it, it opens up the possibility to go through the healing process. You know, things like, you know, bombarding somebody to get constant reassurance they're always going to be there. You know, and that's from the 9-year-old self, or, you know, however old. You know, constantly living in fear, either of being close or, you know, not being close. Things like treading on eggshells, don't want to upset them. You know, that's often, you know, I say anything, well, of course, as an adult relationship, we need to work in the space between and invite those discussions. But, oh, I can't say that because I might upset them, or because they might leave me, or, you know, whatever it is, which is the stories that we create that fits the narrative that we have imprinted in our minds. And this is the bit that's beneath the surface. The stories we create, they're fantastic. Hasn't texted me, doesn't love me, you know. No, he's busy at work, or, you know, she doesn't want to spend the day with me, you know, or she's out shopping with her friends, you know, but the stories are based on this blueprint, imprint. And of course it makes absolute sense. If we've experienced this, we're going to have this. I ran a symposium a few years back now, and I stood up at this symposium and said, you know, anybody else have an abandonment wound, you know? And I said, I'm just going to put both my hands up, because I was very aware of it. And just so you can see the impact of it, with my husband, one day, and I was I don't know if I was a training therapist or whether I think I was probably a training therapist at the time. I was at home, and this is what it looks like, and it sounds madness, but this is what, can be activated. And I want your listeners to understand that this is what it looks like. There's nothing wrong with you. It's what's happened to you. So I was at home, and I just had this overwhelming sensation that my husband had left me. I mean, he'd gone to work, and I was so compelled. It was so overwhelming. I got in my car. I drove to the train station to look for his car. I mean, it sounds crazy. And I looked around, and I was in this kind of really hyper state of he's gone, he's left me. And I drove around the car park and found his car. And I literally sat there and started laughing at myself, because what was I doing? I mean, but it was so compelling to do it, to check. Of course, he hadn't left me. There was no reason he was going to leave me. But because of my blueprint, this is what happened. And I went to therapy the next day, and I went, guess what I did? And it was like, oh, bless you. Never mind. And I think we have to give ourselves compassion that sometimes these do get activated. And to this day, I don't know why that was activated. I mean, most of the ones I can kind of understand and work out, but that I have no idea. It just happened.
Yeah, well, your consciousness was ready to look at that, I guess, in that session.
Yeah. And something then activated. And I think some of the relationship difficulties, so things like codependency, that attachment, how can you find the place of separateness? Sometimes I've seen where people have if they've been bereaved, and their partner may not be bereaved, but they may have other things that have been difficult. And what starts out maybe as a codependent relationship, which is, fine because it serves both of them. When they go through kind of their life and they start to heal themselves a bit more, of course, that doesn't work anymore. So then the relationship goes through a change, and it invites more autonomy on both sides. Mm-hmm. So, if people do work on themselves, become more conscious, the codependency may change, and that may actually put an extra strain on the relationship, because if one person's doing work on themselves, the other person might not be. So things like codependency. Another one that I think is interesting is a thing called repetition compulsion, where you try and get the same outcome as you experienced in early life. So if I'm a really big pain in the backside, this person will definitely leave me, and I'm going to push it that far so that I just get that to happen again. I mean, our minds are bizarre, but yeah, we like that one very much. We go home, it's familiar. With the going home bit, what's familiar. I really will act out big enough, because I want to check if you're going to stay around. Mm-hmm. So we just get compelled to replicate that. And I think, again, being conscious of when we're in that phase, which is deep, deep, deep in our unconscious. Things like sex. Mm-hmm. We did say we'd have a talk about this.
We did.
It's an interesting one, because sex and love become very kind of close together, and the fear of intimacy, which is not sex. An intimate relationship is not just a sexual relationship. Sexual relationship is part of an intimate relationship. But sometimes we can have sexual interactions or frequent sexual interactions because there is a fear of intimacy. So we want the connection. We want to feel that, touch or sensation in some way, but we don't want to get close because that's in our blueprint. It depends. I've never really kind of put this one out, but when I was kind of thinking about this before today, it was like, there's a merging, isn't there? Sex is often about, that kind of altered state, and it's sort of merging, maybe just as you did with your parent, and recreating that dynamic. Inability to have sexual relationships. So, and I have seen this where people cannot either actually have penetrative sex, or they can't orgasm because it's too close. There's a fear of that happening because there's a risk. Again, it's that sort of slightly, I must not get too close because I can't trust that this will continue. So I think some of those things, again, therapists, couple therapists will be able to hopefully guide somebody through that. If and I think is to take it as I'm a bereaved child. This is what I notice in this part of me, so that the therapist can be conscious of it, because it does happen. One of the things I thought about when I was coming on was ABCs often don't have memory. And if they're in terms of relationship, well, I don't know what I felt like, and that's often true. We don't have memory. Our memory is kind of erased, and that is, a trauma response, to protect us. But it will play out in relationship. Even if we don't know an actual memory, of what we experience, it will play out. So I think when you work with the possibilities, and do sort of, second best guessing about what is happening. And I would say, relationships always need work. We need to understand, and it's a lifelong, it is a lifelong process. It is about, awareness of what's happening, understanding your own story, the blueprint, the unconscious fits, what we get triggered with, what are our defenses, what's outdated now, what is it that we're still creating in our mind that's not really true, and finding those opportunities to transform that, so that we can, if we choose to be in relationship, we want the best type of relationship. We're not pushing it away. We're not clinging. We're not suffocating it. We're not doing those real things that we do as a bereaved child. So, and it's encouraging each other to share feelings, from your truth and from your adult self, and be courageous in that. And of course, there's a challenge there already for a bereaved child to be courageous. It's like, oh no, I'll just keep it quiet because then you'll stay. But that doesn't help the relationship.
Yeah, and just that whole thing of feelings right there, that certainly took me a long time to know what I was feeling. Yeah, so
it's a lifetime's work, Tara.
Yes.
And I think if you're conscious that it's a lifetime work, and compassionate to yourself that it is a lifetime's work, then you can just be with it and see what unfolds, what provides those opportunities for growth of self or for growth in relationship.
Yeah. So much to take in there, Mandy. It's, a lot, but it's really great stuff. I mean, I've learned so much from you in such a short space of time in this conversation and our previous conversations. So yeah, it's making me more and more curious about this impact of grief in our early life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I say that's why I'm so passionate about it, because, you know, when you start putting it out there, it all makes sense
mm-hmm.
completely. Yeah, you know, we think this, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't do that. Or I'm, you know, it's, you know, why can't I have a relationship? Why is it? Oh, you know, it makes sense. But if you're aware, that's why I think these conversations are so important for adults bereaved as children. You're not going mad.
Yeah, and I know that for the sake of this, because like you and I could literally talk the entire day, but for the sake of this, conversation, we've really sort of highlighted relationships, but there's other facets, isn't there? Like
Yeah.
self-confidence and,
Yeah.
not feeling very smart or,
Oh yeah, I mean, like everything, you know, you can pick into, and you know, I sort of take the childhood research, you know, bereaved children's research, and then try and, you know, bring it into, so things as you say, like, you know, not feeling smart. There are research papers which talk about the impact on educational ability, you know, as a bereaved child. You know, when you think about that just in a very quick sense, you know, how that then translates for the whole of our life. I mean, I certainly had that. Definitely 100%. And I never realized it. I just thought I was stupid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it was because there was a rupture in my educational developing self, because I was in survival. You know, and then, you know, I had to do my master's, you know, when I was 50. I had to do my first degree when I was 50. I mean, you know, I'm really pleased that I did it. But for all that time, it was like, oh no, I can't do anything like that. I'm not very clever, which is rubbish. It's just what's happened to us. And that's why we have to understand what's happened to us and how it impacts us, which is why these conversations, you know, it gives us, oh, okay, but it doesn't mean it's the end of the road. It means that, okay, that is what happened to me and this is the impact. Okay, how do I want it to be now? How how would I like my career to look? How would I like my relationship to look? How would I like to be in the world?
Yes. And that's a very inspirational place to land on, because I think whatever age we are, that we become conscious of our grief and what happened when we were a child, it's never too late.
It's never, ever, ever too late. Ever.
So that's just for anybody who's listening who feels like, oh, I'm too old to begin on this path, or there's too much, and it's all possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I always like to ask people, I know we've used the word several times throughout this interview, but like, if you were to interpret the term conscious grief, what would you say?
I wrote a few things down here, Tara.
Great. Thank you.
So I kind of sat with it and thought, yeah, it's about us being conscious. You know, it's about awareness of how our grief can manifest and arise without knowing. So, like some of the examples we've talked about today is like really kind of going, be curious about it, you know. You know, it may not be anything to do with grief, but it may be. It's like no judgment on it, is just curiosity. And for it to be known, you know, and thinking about the phrase I like to use is like, what needs attention? That just invites a nice, gentle ease into it. I think there is a society consciousness around grief, which is more, but particularly for adults bereaved as children, practitioner conscious awareness. As you see, it's like we've talked about, it's because it's so far down the road. It's like, this is grief. So conscious grief for this particular sector is, how does it manifest in adult life? How does unresolved childhood grief manifest in adult life? So that's my drive, to make this more conscious from, the people who work in this arena, and also just through conversations. I ask people I work with to talk about it, because we have a ripple effect. If we talk about it, we might touch somebody else, and they can then be conscious in their grief, and then it ripples to somebody else, and therefore we become informed as a society.
Yeah.
There was a book I read in my dissertation, and one of the phrases in it was that if enough people do inner work, society changes. And I thought at that time, oh, that's so ideal, yeah, whatever. And, several years on, I believe it, because I see it. I see how it impacts the individual. I see how it impacts their relationship. I see how it impacts their children. I see how it impacts their identity, how it impacts their self-esteem, how it impacts their place of work, how it impacts then beyond that. The ripple effect of being conscious in grief is enormous. And I'm talking about adults bereaved as children. I mean, I know there's lots of grief talk, and I'm pleased to hear that. But for adults bereaved as children, because we tend not to talk about it, it is somehow cocooned and shrouded in shame. So I invite everybody who's an adult bereaved as a child to talk about it. And I know that's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But each and every one of us is part of the change. Each and every one of us can talk about it if we dig deep enough. I've sat with people who are in their 40s and have never told their friends that their parent died.
Wow. Yeah.
So take a risk, talk about it. You're part of it all. Everyone here is part of it. And that's the path of healing, and that we can all help each other, for people to be more conscious.
Mm-hmm. Lovely. Yeah. Thank you, Mandy. So much there. And yeah, it's true that by having these conversations and opening it up, helps other people to either begin grieving or have the courage to do some therapy and realize that they're not alone in this.
They're not.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you so much for being here and sharing everything. We will have a link to your website underneath this so that whoever's been listening can continue to follow Mandy's important work and mission for, really like getting the lost mourners more understanding and recognition.
Yep. Thanks, Tara. Appreciate
Anything
it.
else that you'd like to share before?
No, it's been just so lovely. So lovely to connect with you. And I'm sure we'll have lots more conversations.
I'm sure too. Yeah. So thank you, everyone who's been listening. Bye.
Bye.